Hey, everybody, this is Bob Cargill from Bob Cargill's Marketing Show. We are recording episode 134 today. I can't believe it. Love it. Things are moving along. Things are moving along positively lately, huh? We're getting through the summer. It's been great weather here in the Boston area, and we're getting through the pandemic, crossing our fingers, saying our prayers, thinking, yes, James, thinking of those who have suffered due to COVID-19. So sorry for all the people who have been affected and grieving the loss of those who have succumbed to COVID-19. We still have to be careful, but there is brighter days ahead, and that's a good thing. Hey, everybody, again, this is Bob Cargill and episode 134, and it's episode 134 with James Gardner. Hi, James. How are you?
Thanks, Bob. Thrilled to be with you today.
I'm so glad you're here, James. It's a long overdue conversation. Let me tell our listeners and anyone who is watching on video, it's Tuesday, July 27, 2021. Like I said, we're almost halfway through the summer, maybe more than that. I don't know in terms of the exact number of days in the summer and where we are, but I'm looking outside and it's a hot, sunny day. I can tell you that. I've been indoors working most of the day, but after this recording, I'm going to step outside, maybe run a few miles like I do almost every day. But yes, I hope everybody who's listening and watching is enjoying their summer. And I know you are all looking forward to, as much as I am, my conversation with James Gardner. Let me tell you just a little bit about James, and then he's going to tell you a lot more about himself, because that's always my first question, asking our guests to say what they do, who they are, et cetera, et cetera. Let me tell you about James. James is a digital sales and marketing leader with 20 years of B2C and B2B experience, while his career's roots are in consumer packaged goods and strategy consulting. James has held leadership roles at fast-moving tech startups, established Fortune 1000 leaders, and forward-leaning digital marketing agencies. James started his career with Procter Gamble before earning his MBA at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Since then, James has served clients as a consultant with McKinsey Company, led complex digital projects while agency side, and built several high-performing marketing teams. Now we're getting to the part that I can relate to, because I met James at Northeastern University. That's where he teaches digital media. And James has been very kind to ask me to be a guest speaker at his classes many times over the last few years. So it's finally my turn to ask James to join my program, if you will. He's a contributing editor for MedTech Boston, and he actively mentors startups from Mass Challenge and the Harvard Innovation Lab. James, as I was just saying, you have been so kind to ask me to be a guest speaker in your classroom at Northeastern University. It's about darn time I asked you to be my guest on Bob Cargill's Marketing Show. Thanks for being here, and please tell everybody about your professional journey in a nutshell, or even more than that. Take your time. Tell us all about yourself.
Well, Bob, first of all, thanks again for having me on the show today. It really is a thrill and an honor to join you and your friends for the next 40 minutes or so. It means a lot, and I really appreciate the kindness that you've extended to me. And I don't even recognize the person that you just introduced. I suppose it is me, but humbly, I'm not half the man you described. But I
No, you're
appreciate
one and a half man that I just you're one and a half the man I just described. You are do not undersell yourself, James. You are an amazing human being. You know so many people. You're a great teacher. I haven't worked with you, but I can imagine what a fantastic colleague you are. But again, I don't want to steal your thunder.
Yeah, that's so flattering. As you described, I'm a lifelong B2C and B2B marketer with a lot of sales experience along the way. And the journey is a complex one, but briefly, I grew up in Toronto, so there's a Canadian accent that some of your listeners may pick up on occasionally, although I've been south of the border going on 20 plus years now. There are certain phrases that will be a tell for those with good ears. But I started my career at Procter Gamble. Which is the best place I can imagine to start a career and start a professional life. It really is a terrific organization. They train, they invest in their people. Obviously, they've got a terrific stable of brands, and they really know what they're doing. So I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I certainly learned from some really smart people about the nuts and bolts of consumer packaged goods marketing. And I've carried those lessons with me through the rest of my life. But shortly after my stint at P&G, I jumped across the border to go to school at Northwestern, as you described, really looking to accelerate my marketing chops and take my skills to a whole new level. And Northwestern was a terrific experience to do that. It's renowned as a marketing-centric MBA program. So highly endorse anyone who would consider going there for graduate studies. And then I stayed on in Chicago because I really loved the city and found it just a wonderful place to start my postgraduate school career. And I worked with McKinsey Company in their consumer goods and retailing practice for almost 5 years, working with organizations, both CPG, but also retailing throughout the Midwest, helping them solve super complex, super challenging problems, and had the wonderful experience of working both with wonderful clients, but also just terrific colleagues, wicked smart folks. And they just challenge you to take your game to the next level every day, which is a great lesson learned for your audience. You know, work with wonderful people that challenge you, and you'll rise just by being exposed to their ambitions and their talents. I then jumped out of corporate America in the traditional sense and reload to Boston with my wife, and have spent the last 20 or so years working traditionally, for the most part rather, in digital agencies and digital startups. That's been the bulk of my time here in Boston. And I've had the good fortune of working with some of the best clients, some of the agencies that are located in Boston, but also working with great colleagues at various startups and smaller organizations, building marketing teams, launching brands, and helping, in large part, healthcare clients, which has been a more recent passion of mine, take their journeys online and serve patients more successfully. So there's a lot there to unpack, Bob. Everything from my early days at Procter Gamble to strategy consulting at McKinsey, through a number of agencies, and then also startups. So pick and choose what you'd like to drill into, or we can move on. Your call.
Love it, James. And some of this I'm somewhat intimately familiar with from having known you over the last few years. But again, we've never worked together. And usually when we are together, I'm doing the talking in your class. We're not necessarily having a 40-minute long or so conversation like today. So, you know what I say to people about having a podcast? I get to know my guests. I could know someone like yourself for years, but then I talk to them one-on-one with no distractions for, 40 minutes to an hour. And I learn things I've never learned about them before. Your background, you and I are kind of parallel professional lives to some degree. You have the P&G start. I started at RCA for my first job, and then Warner Brothers. So, iconic companies, as is Procter and Gamble. So I love the backgrounds that we share in common, and also the lesson you pointed out, because I do like to teach, like you love to teach, and teach lessons, and whether I'm writing or recording a podcast, working with people. You said they challenge you, and I don't know if water seeps to its own level, if that's the right axiom, but we tend to work like those who are around us. So nice lesson for younger people early in their career. Am I right? Surround yourself with the right people.
Oh, I think you're so right. I think there's an expression that you, over time, become the average of the 5 to 10 people that you spend the most time with.
Wow.
So just process that. Like,
Yeah.
if you're surrounded by laggards and dullards and negativity, that can't help but influence your mindset and your thinking. On the other hand, if you're surrounded by ambitious, smart, hardworking people that are fun-loving and are achieving over and above, that's going to rub off on you. So that's definitely a lesson learned for everyone. And I can't help but just process, the parallel tracks that we've had in starting our careers at leading organizations. And I'm often asked, like, James, or Professor James, what would you recommend? Start my career at a startup, where it's fast and loose and we're moving really quickly, or start my career at a P&G or at a RCA or another large organization. And obviously there's pros and cons to both types of organizations, but I've concluded over time that there's so many benefits to starting a career in an organization where at least there's a fundamental approach to doing things the right way. If I can say that without sounding like a fuddy-duddy, but I really believe there are best practices and there are lessons learned that organizations like P&G have just developed over the years. And it's one thing to eventually be in a situation where you can break rules and move fast and get things done in a small organization. But there's also something to be said about knowing what those best practices are and anchoring the early part of your career in those. What are your thoughts about that, Bob?
You couldn't. It couldn't have been a better segue because I'm writing down something you just said, and thank you for asking me what I think because I wanted to say something. You mentioned lessons learned, and I'm not at all, please, trying to do a shameless plug of my forthcoming book, but lessons learned is in the title, and it's all about the places I've worked, and it ties so much into the conversation we're already having. Because you work at these big companies, you learn a lot, and sometimes you might even learn by bumping your head because you're going to be given the opportunity, but you're surrounded by such good people that they won't let you fall. They'll catch you.
Right.
So it's a great training ground, these big companies. I agree with you 110%. And also the surrounding yourself with great people. In writing my book, I was telling you before I pressed record, that I'm reaching back out to some former employees I haven't talked to in a long time because the book's about lessons they taught me. And I'm saying to myself, wow, I've been so lucky, not really realizing it at the time, but I've learned from so many great people. And I never heard the expression you said, you're the sum or the average of all the 5 and 10 people. If I string together my 20 bosses or 20 jobs I've had, because that's the name of my book right now, working title, 20 jobs, 20 lessons. To say, if I can say I'm the average of those 20 bosses, I'm a lucky man because those are great bosses and great companies.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Well, you set that up for me and we didn't even plan it.
So we've both been blessed earlier in our careers to have been surrounded by mentors, coaches, and people that really invested in our success. And I could be wrong. I'm sure there's people like that in smaller organizations, but I've found just on average that they do tend to congregate in organizations like McKinsey or P&G or some of the organizations you've worked at. So maybe as a starting point for the first 5 to 10 years in your career, consider investing in yourself and developing that foundation of skills and that foundation of lessons learned from people that truly understand best practices. And then I would suggest take those into the world of startups or smaller organizations with the confidence that you've seen how corporate America rolls, you've seen what works, and you've got the skills and expertise and knowledge to stick to those when you know it's going to work, and break those rules at the same time when you feel confident that something different is needed. That's just my take.
It's sage advice, James. About those lessons, if I can ask you to be specific, are there any one or two at any point in your career lessons you learned that those learnings you've carried with you to this day and maybe share with your students now?
Gosh, some of the observations and takes that I took away from P&G, they seem so obvious, and they seem so self-evident, and yet you and I can attest, so much of what's common sense is not very common. And we could debate why, but it just is what it is. But P&G, to their credit, I mean, they're not a perfect organization, but things like relentlessly listening to the voice of the customer. Now that seems obvious, but they invest more money and more time into understanding unmet needs and unmet challenges and problems and things that consumers want different. Even when consumers can't even articulate that they have a problem, they're in people's homes, they're in people's laundry rooms, they're in people's kitchens, watching, listening, learning, so that they can constantly identify what's not working, or why is mom doing it, or why is dad doing that in a weird way, so that they can bring forth a new solution. That's really impressive when you see how far they push that. They're also just really relentless about pushing their technology and always having the next thing in detergents, or the next thing in soaps, the next things in toothpaste. And yes, it seems mundane as a consumer. We don't think about this, but there is an arms race and investing in the technology that allows you to truly have product superiority. That's really, really important to P&G. And then a last lesson learned, just as I reflect on kind of top of mind observations, is just a relentless desire to always improve. So they're always measuring the impact of their efforts, whether it's the effect of a commercial that they've produced. They just don't put it out there and hope that it's communicating product benefits and features successfully. They're measuring its effectiveness. They're measuring brand recall. They're measuring consumer affinity to purchase, so that they can not only improve that commercial, but they can next time do an even better job. So they're just always seeking to up their game and figure out, why was that not as good as it could have been? And what can we do differently next time? Those all seem like obvious things that every organization should be doing, but I assure your listeners, those practices are not nearly as widespread as they should be, and many, many others. And if I could, you've stirred a memory of a talking point that one of my first bosses at P&G planted with me, and I'd be curious with your take on this, Bob. She was a very busy manager, and we didn't know better. The newbies that were reporting to her, we'd go to her with problems, right? This isn't working, or I don't know what to do, or what should I, do next? And she instilled in all of us, be the man. It could have been the woman, but be the man with the plan. Don't come to me with your problem. I'm not here to solve your problem. Come to me with the problem and 2 or 3 recommendations or options, and a plan or a recommendation that you think makes the most sense. And it could be wrong. All 3 of your options could be horrible, but at least you've done the hard work of thinking about possible solutions. And what a great lesson learned, amongst many, to take away from a first boss, because she really wanted to invest in us. And obviously there's a promote from within culture at P&G, which also makes them unique. She couldn't be promoted until one of us, or many of us, were ready to step into her shoes. So what an incentive to coach and mentor and develop people when you know that you can't climb the ladder until you're lifting someone up behind you. So
yes.
Have you seen that before, Bob?
No, I wrote down the earlier part of that riff. You would talking about experimentation or learning, and I wrote down test and learn. That's something, an expression in marketing, especially in direct marketing, the specific field in which I made my living, certainly for many of the early years. Test and learn, do it better the next time, or test, see what works best, and then roll out. So you test to a small audience, then roll out to a bigger audience. In terms of what you're saying about have a plan, that's should be, isn't always the case, but should be management 101 in terms of what you tell your people who report to you. Please, don't just come to me with problems. Come to me with problems and your recommended solution. And if you can teach people to come up with the solutions themselves, they're gonna outdistance themselves for the competition for, let's say, the boss's job, and then the boss can move up one notch and you can take over because you're a solutions provider. So absolutely, James. Great examples of learning and specific learnings from earlier superiors, if you will, and certainly from the bigger companies. The bigger companies, we're just more likely to find those mentors. Not that they can't be found in a small company, and I worked at a lot of small companies, but
me too.
Early in my career was the bigger companies, and I think, like you said, learn best practices and then start experimenting, and that goes with your career decisions as well. You might try a few different smaller type operations. Any other bosses, people, companies you want to give a shout out to, if you will, in terms of what they taught you or how they inspired you, et cetera?
I've got so many favorite memories from bosses at P&G and bosses at McKinsey. One recollection from McKinsey, when you're so young, you don't even know what you don't know. Um, and I naively sat in on some meetings with some senior client executives alongside my uh, boss at McKinsey. And we weren't even 30 seconds down the elevator exiting the building. And he started interrogating me on details of the meeting. And I was flustered because he was really being direct and specific. And what he was getting at is, why were you not taking notes during the meeting, James? You have a less than perfect recall, and we're not even out of the building. Uh, Fast forward 24 hours, fast forward a week, you will have no recollection of what was promised or what was discussed. And that's unforgivable. And I took away that lesson.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
carry it with me to this day, amongst many. He was a terrific mentor, a terrific coach, and he valued my track at the firm enough to want to coach me and want me to be successful. And that was one of many lessons. Always take notes in a meeting. You will not remember even half of it tomorrow.
Take
Yes.
notes.
And to this day, I see colleagues attending meetings, sitting in on sessions, no note taking going on. And I can't help but wonder, like, how do they hope to deliver on the promises that have been made or hold people accountable when there's no documentation as to what was discussed or what was agreed? One of many, many things. But
Yeah.
he was
And,
so direct with me that I couldn't help but carry that with me 30 years later.
and these are the basics, but you and I also, I think before I hit record, we're talking about the basics that perhaps people of certain stage in their career learned when early in their career that perhaps, I don't know for a fact, is not being taught now, but it's just some of the basics like taking notes during a meeting, or I'll throw this one out, being on time for a
Being on
meeting,
time,
just,
having an agenda for a meeting,
yeah.
perhaps publishing minutes or notes
Yep,
from a
after a
meeting.
meeting. Yeah, and what just
Yeah,
covering meeting etiquette, if you will, meeting best practices. I
Bob,
don't know if they're covering all of that in orientation on the job nowadays, but they certainly should be. And I'm guessing they are at most places. But I do think the chances of learning these basics are greater, I would think, at the bigger companies because they have the budgets and person power to put on these big, let's say, week-long orientations. Whereas if it's a startup or a 10-person company, they don't have the budget or the time to do all that training.
yeah, I don't like to stereotype, and obviously I've spent a lot of time in small companies, but you're right. For the most part, startups are moving so quickly that there's not always the time or the resources to do the coaching and the mentoring and the performance evaluations and whatnot. And Bob, you do raise a great point, which concerns me. As we wind our way through the pandemic and we look at the future of work and how and where we're all going to be working, there is a movement, in some cases by many young people, who want to work from home 4 or 5 days a week. And that really concerns me because I think there is immense value to that mentoring and coaching and feedback that doesn't happen at the end of a Zoom call when you all disperse
Yep.
and the boss may be shaking her head at the comment you made during the meeting, but they never get the chance to actually tell you that was a great observation, or that was a great comment, or that was a great presentation, or you should have done this differently, or that was a terrific job you did. None of that mentoring and feedback happens when the entire workforce is dispersed and working remotely. Or if it does happen, it's much more challenging and much more infrequent. We all know the hallway conversations that happen when you're working face to face. That's when you get the attaboy or the attagirl from the boss, or you get invited to a lunch to talk shop about the meeting or the client call that you were just on. That's immensely valuable, and it concerns me when I hear of young people passing up that opportunity to have that mentorship from leaders and senior organizational leaders, I would really discourage it. If I was a 20-something professional or a 30-something professional looking to climb the ladder, I'd look for every opportunity I could to have that mentorship, have that coaching, have that feedback, have that face-to-face time, and learn what is not shared on a Zoom call typically.
No,
I don't know, do you have thoughts about that?
yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. In terms of the reality, I think some of what that movement may be to some degree inevitable. There may be a fraction of industry categories that can succeed as well. And hey, maybe even more so having people work from home. But I do believe those who work from home absolutely are going to be short shrifted to some degree in terms of, yes, camaraderie, communication skills, interpersonal skills, the corporate culture they're going to miss out on. So,
Right.
hopefully, yes, people will see the light, if you will, on both sides, meaning employers and employees, and realize the value of being on site. It's a tough one because obviously there are some benefits to having people work from wherever, if you will.
Yeah.
There's a cost savings, there's a time savings, but again, the trade-off is they lose the chances for mentorship and bonding, which is so important.
Correct.
It's a tough one, and I'll be interested to see how it all shakes out in the next year or two.
It's definitely an interesting time.
Say, James, what about any other during the course of your career? And then we'll get up to date, if you will, and talk. You and I are both teachers. We have to cover that a little bit.
Sure.
And then even look into the future. But and I know there've been many. So time permitting, and I have all the time in the world, if you want to share with me accomplishments, some big or just notable positive moments in your career that you're proud of, or that might have been turning points or milestones.
So there have definitely been many. I've been blessed, right? And for that, I've got a lot of gratitude to leaders that invested in me, programs that graduated me, companies that hired me. So I've had a lot of blessings along the way, and I'm very privileged, if I could be honest with you, for some of the successes that I've enjoyed along the way. And yes, there's been awards, there's been recognitions. I'm actually more drawn just personally to some of the smaller, more personal highlights, things that others may not even have noticed along the way. And as I was reflecting on this question, it took me back to circa 2000, just as an example, where I was asked by the Food and Drug Administration to testify in Washington on direct-to-consumer advertising, which was under a lot of scrutiny, especially in the pharmaceutical category. And there wasn't a lot of understanding by the FDA around digital and what a website could do for a pharmaceutical brand or for a disease category. And I may not have tipped the balance, I may have had no impact at all, but I'd like to think that I opened the eyes of the commissioners to just the value of digital in that pharmaceutical world, especially around people who are struggling with a disease or struggling with a condition, not even aware that they had a problem. And digital, as we know, even back in 2000, was increasingly a go-to place to identify symptoms and reach even a preliminary conclusion as to what you might be suffering from and initiate a conversation with a doctor. And yes, this sounds so obvious now, but circa 2000, this was like revolutionary thinking, and there was almost a move to ban digital by pharmaceutical marketers. And I was asked to testify, and I brought with me the knowledge, having worked with Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline and others, that this was real, this was actually critically important, and it was actually making a difference in a lot of people's lives who were self-diagnosing problems and having really important conversations with their physician about disease states. And I brought that to FDA and spoke very passionately. And I hope I made a difference. And I look back on that as like potentially one of the more significant things I've done in my life, in as much as they did move forward with approving a relaxing of standards and enabling pharmaceutical marketers to move forward with websites and paid search advertising and tactics that we now take for granted. I mean, more recently, I've worked with a lot of health systems because healthcare marketing is a real passion of mine. And there's something very gratifying about taking a hospital website that's broken or dysfunctional and is complex to use, and bringing best practices and bringing the voice of the customer to the experience and re-architecting the experience and enabling patients to have a much simpler, faster, more convenient journey to health. And that could be everything from identifying the problem they have, finding a clinician and researching the right one for their family or their loved one, scheduling an appointment, obviously carrying through that treatment, paying their bills afterwards, maybe staying as a loyal patient at that hospital. All of that can be done digitally. And I've had the good fortune of working with dozens and dozens of health systems and really making care more accessible and more convenient for patients. And that's also just really gratifying to know that while you're not a doctor and you're not delivering care, you're helping those who are.
You're not a doctor, but you play one on
Yes.
TV. That was an old ad,
Yes.
right?
Yes, you're right.
You're not a doctor, but you play one as a consultant or
Yeah.
something
Well,
of that ilk.
in another world, I would have loved to have been a doctor or been closer to the delivery of care, but I'm a marketer, and given the skills I've got, making care more accessible is kind of the next best thing. It helps doctors and helps patients, so there's also a lot of gratification that comes from that.
It's transformative, and
Yeah.
I love what you're sharing. And yeah, I mean, healthcare, they are saving lives, and to be right behind them, helping them
Right.
to save lives. I agree. It has to be a fulfilling feeling. And yeah, I'm right there with you. And in terms of digital in healthcare, the patient portals we have now, let's say as consumers, as patients, I love it. I love that I can get test results instantly, that I can email my doctor. And like you say, the websites that these hospitals have nowadays, they're so sophisticated,
Correct.
and you think back to 20 years ago when it was brand new, you did play an instrumental role, or should feel that you did
Yes.
play a significant role in that. You testified. That's a big deal, James.
Well, thank you. More generally, Bob, you've stirred up a thought that I'd love to discuss with you, which is the value and the importance of having purpose or a mission in our professional lives,
Mm-hmm.
and how motivational that is. And for me, healthcare is obviously a very mission-driven field, as is teaching. And I didn't know this early in my career, but the value of having a North Star that guides you and that you find a calling in being attached to, that's incredibly inspirational. And again, I'd encourage your listeners to contemplate that. If they are unhappy in their role, perhaps what they're lacking is a larger sense of purpose that motivates them to get out of bed on Monday morning and slog through some of the more unpleasant parts of their role, knowing that you're serving a higher purpose, which could be access to healthcare for consumers or something of that nature.
Yeah, don't think of what you do just as a job. And if that is how you think of it, you might want to question if it's the right field for you in which to earn your livelihood. Because, yeah, I say to myself, I think you and I are cut from the same cloth in this regard. Probably whatever I did in my career, I would have immersed myself in and made it my calling. I'm just that way. or I've just been lucky to find a
Yeah.
field that I do feel is my calling, because, hey, it's marketing. I'm not saving lives, but I do feel very, I feel like it is, I live and breathe it, not just work it. I mean, I have a passion for it. And if people don't, yeah, you want to, so try to look at it, anyone listening, watching, if you're feeling tad dissatisfied, see what within your field, within your area of expertise, you can make more a bigger calling, and what
Correct.
is your role in that doing something for the greater good. Am I articulating this the way
I
you were thinking?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And that might be a nice segue to our shared passion for being in front of students in a
Yeah.
classroom, which is also just another very mission-driven field. As you described, I've had the privilege of being adjunct faculty at Northeastern University's College of Professional Studies, going on 6 years now. And what a privilege it is every week to be in front of a group of super smart, super ambitious, super curious graduate students who are looking to you to shed light on the world of digital media, in my case, and bring in interesting speakers, but more importantly, to communicate the passion that I have. And Bob, you've been instrumental in bringing that mission to life as a guest speaker multiple times. I think you're one of my most popular guests in my classroom, bringing wisdom and insight every semester, and really opening up your professional network and helping my students feel the excitement that you have for the field.
Well, James, how about
Yeah.
this for a calling that you could have no matter what you do for a living, learn enough about it so that you can teach it someday. There's a
Oh, I
nice
love that.
goal,
Yes.
because doesn't it feel good? We share this fulfillment. We're both teaching now at the college level as adjunct faculty members. That's what I am, an adjunct faculty member at 2 different schools, part-time, loving it and saying,
Yes.
geez, why didn't I do this sooner? But perhaps the answer is, hey, you didn't know all that you know now sooner. So it's a natural progression and a nice goal for any young person. Hey, learn everything you can so you can be one of those thought leaders, and maybe even, if you want, be a college professor someday, sharing what you learned during the course of your career, helping others get started in their own career. Because I find so much satisfaction in sharing what I do know with students and seeing their reaction. And it feels so good. And I'll be honest with you, you don't really feel that. I don't in business as much. It's a little more, uh, it's cold. It's a colder. I'm trying to think of the right
Yep. Yep.
words. It's business.
Yes. Yes.
and
Yeah,
and
there
and
is something unique about the academic environment.
yeah.
And I'll just give you an example. As I said, I've been teaching going on 6 years or so. So some of my graduates are now fairly well into their careers. And boy, is it exciting to see where their paths have taken them. Because I'm invested in their success. Obviously, I'm just that kind of professor. I follow their careers and I cheer them on. And it's amazing the paths that many of them have taken. They're in large organizations, small organizations. Some of them are back in China or Brazil or Russia or here in America, launching just incredible professional journeys. So how exciting is that to know that you were there when the rocket ship launched and you helped get it off the ground? That's
You
kind of
lit
how
the
I see my
fire,
role.
James, in
Yeah.
many cases. You were part of what lit the fire for these students. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I haven't been teaching quite as long, only a few years, 2 or 3 years. But yes, I see what you're saying. And I do stay in touch with quite a few of my students, and it's very fulfilling. I know some of your students who I've
That's
stayed
right.
in touch with, and I've watched what they're doing. And it's very, very impressive. And James, they all sing your praises. They all were inspired by you, and also you've connected them to your network, and that includes fortunate people like me to be able to meet some of your former students.
Yeah. So it might be just instructional to have your audience understand a little bit about how I structure my course. 'Cause, I found it
Very
to be
uniquely, yes.
really successful. So it's a semester-based program. We get together for about 13 weeks, once a week. And one of the commitments I make to my class is that we'll have guest speakers every week. And it's not just because the professor's lazy and doesn't want to give a lecture for 2.5 hours. It really is based on the belief that the true leaders and the true people that are making things happen in the world of digital media, they're not me. They're people in industry, people that have real world knowledge, people that are doing what I teach about every day. So I bring those people into my class and give them the pulpit for a full hour to talk about their jobs, their career paths, what they do every day, what they like about their job, what they don't like about their job, and really expose my students to what's going on in the world of digital in a way that one person could never hope to do, and one textbook could never hope to do. And of course, there's lectures that go alongside those guest speakers. But the feedback I get from my students consistently is that they treasure the opportunity to rub shoulders with people like you, Bob, who are dialed in to what's really happening. And of course, they leave the class with the world's best professional network, which is an accidental blessing. But I can't count the number of people that now have you in their LinkedIn network as an example and can use you as a connection point to accelerate their careers. So what a blessing that is as well, to have learned from you and then to count you as a friend and as a professional connection.
No, and that's thanks to you, James. And I think I agree with you again, 110% in that the textbook provides, the fundamentals, our lectures as professors augment or supplement or whatever the right word is, what they learn in the textbook, but bringing in people from the real world who are doing it currently. And, first of all, they're learning, they're getting case studies live. And second of all, something I don't think I got much of when I went to college back in the day is that the networking, the connections, because I tell my students, you're all going to come out of here, with similar degrees and probably comparable great grades because you're all rock stars. But where you might separate yourself from the 200 other people competing for that same job is you might know somebody at that company if you do networking, if you use LinkedIn, if you talk to the person I'm trying to connect you with, or who, in your case, you bring these folks into the classroom and you tell them to stay in touch, and they do connect with me and all the others, multiply me times like 25, I'm sure, or 50 others that you bring in. What a benefit you are giving your students, James. Again, transformative would be my word.
It's really powerful. And let me share a secret with you. Breaking news here on Bob Cargill's marketing podcast. I'm really excited about some guest speakers that are going to be joining me this fall. Joe Polizzi and Robert Rose, two of the most distinguished experts in the world of content marketing.
Wow.
Published authors, frequent keynote speakers to thousands of folks, friends of mine for years and years. And without a question, when I reached out to them, they raised their hand and said, count us in. We want to be part of what you're doing, James. So they sometimes speak to 2,000 people or 20,000 people on a podcast. They're going to be speaking to a class of 25. So can you just imagine what an experience that's going to be for my students?
Yeah, I'm going to ask to attend that class, James.
Yeah.
You are literally, you are bringing in very top shelf speakers, thought leaders right there.
There's very few people that say no because everyone loves being part of launching students and launching their careers and being given that opportunity to share a passion. So I'm blessed with a network of friends that always say yes when I ask. And
students
Robert
are
and Joe are part of that.
You need to, and this podcast is an example of what I'm going to suggest you need to do. And that is you need to copyright or trademark this unique format you have for teaching and bottle it and sell it, or because Northeastern in you has a gem of a professor and a gem of a curriculum in the courses you teach.
I appreciate the kind words, Bob. It really involves doing nothing except what I would want if I was a student. I would want a professor that was enthusiastic and passionate and brought everything to the class every week. It's what I would want. So that's kind of how I've structured my thinking about the classroom experience. We sometimes talk in the class about ABC, right? Always be curious.
Yes.
And that can mean many things, but it means always have a sense of enthusiasm, always have a sense of curiosity, always be looking to self-improve. It's both great advice for students. It's also just great life advice for all of us. I know it's a mantra that you live every day. I've never seen a more curious person and someone that's like committed to like trying new things and doing things differently and always seeking to improve. That's life advice that if people take nothing else away from this interview, would be pretty solid.
And, to think again, I don't know how we initially met, James, but I know somehow, some way you invited me to speak at your class. But who knew we had so much in common in that regard, and I don't think it's that common, this quality, especially people at a certain stage in their careers having that ABC, if you will, always be curious quality that I know you have and that I know I have. And I think we're blessed in that regard because I feel
Perhaps you're right.
I was just born that way.
I can't imagine going through life otherwise. So for me, it comes naturally as it does for you.
Yeah.
To not be curious and to not be self-improving and to not be like a shark, always moving forward. It's unimaginable for me, yes, but it's unimaginable to live my life professionally in any other way.
I agree. Listen, I'm going to ask you a few more questions and then slowly wind down.
Sure.
If you're good with that, I want to get in these questions and I'm going to ask in terms of outside of your career, outside of the classroom, any thought leaders, any books, any podcasts, anything that has inspired you and inspires you today. In other words, what are you curious about today, James?
Yeah. So here's a pro tip that I share with my students and almost force them to follow through on it. I'm a voracious reader, not so much of books, but certainly of anything online. Blogs, websites, anything that has high quality content professionally. I just want to be on top of that. So I'm a huge fan of RSS reader technology. I've got over 200 RSS feeds in my dashboard. Yes, you're applauding.
How many people besides you and me know what RSS is?
Right. So I coach my students up on this notion of
your students do and my students do.
Yes. We all know
RSS, that can you explain for our audience or do you want me to explain?
I'll explain as best I can and you can dumb it down if I nerdify it too much. But we all know there's limitless blogs and people publishing out there. And in a perfect world, we would spend all day visiting each of those websites and reading what they've published. That's completely unrealistic. There's not enough hours in the day to be dropping by all the sites that we potentially could be following. So RSS feeds allow us to subscribe to websites and through a dashboard, get at a glance, look at what's been published. And if it catches our attention, we don't need to even visit the website to read the article or catch up on the blog post that someone has shared. So it's a super efficient way professionally to subscribe to a vast number of publications and thought leaders without the effort of actually visiting any of them.
I think you can read that, James.
Yep,
so this is Feedly on my phone.
That's my tool of choice as well.
Love that. And so his show and tell. James is just telling, I'm showing. RSS, Real Simple Syndication. That's what I always thought it was an acronym for. Real Simple Syndication. And
I
yes, it's an
can't
easy way.
endorse the tool strongly enough because absent that, there's absolutely no hope of staying current in a field like digital media or social media. There's just too much knowledge being shared. But at least you've got a chance if you've got a dashboard with all of your insightful thought leaders being brought to you in one place. So that's my go-to. I'm also just a fanatical listener of podcasts
Yep.
because there are moments in the day, when you're out walking or you're doing the dishes or whatnot, where you can't have a screen in front of you, but your ears are available, and podcasts uniquely fill that void in your day. So yes, of course, I listen to music and been known to listen to podcasts that aren't completely educational, but when I can and where I can, I'm always trying to advance my knowledge with podcasters from my field or people sharing interesting ideas from outside of my field. So that's also a big part of kind of how I try and stay current in what's going on.
I love it. I,
Mm.
I, I love that you mentioned RSS feeds and blogs and, because, I started my blog in 2004. I'm still
Yeah.
writing it and, not enough, I don't think, attention is given to the blogosphere, if you will, and using RSS to get a steady cacophony. I'm trying to think of the right word there of steady stream of the news you are interested in, but quickly at a glance.
Yes.
And then you can click through and read it if you want. Like me, you could share it on Twitter after you've read it.
Great point.
Let me ask you a couple more questions. Social media in general. I think I know the answer, but I want the audience to know the answer. What's your favorite channel? How much do you use social media? What do you think of social media in general? Just, you can go anywhere with that question, but social media, have at it.
So I'm a little lukewarm on social media at the moment, which is ironic. One of the
Says the
courses.
man who has 10,000 followers on Twitter.
And you're right, and I teach a social media course at Northeastern. But I've just become a little more aware of just some of the drawbacks that it has, some of the harm that it causes. And so I'm not as bullish as I was even 3 years ago. But that being said, I do spend a lot of my time on LinkedIn. I say that's probably the social platform where I spend more time than other platforms. I am very active on Twitter as well. Again, with mixed feelings, just because Twitter can be such a cruel and destructive environment. It's got a lot of mean people, so I try and avoid that. But it is a useful platform to both share thought leadership, which I do quite frequently, but also just to stay abreast of what my peers and fellow thought leaders are saying. It happens on Twitter, so you can't ignore it. And then, yeah, in my personal life, obviously I use Facebook, but reluctantly and not with as much frequency as even a year or two ago. Just I've been increasingly turned off by some of their practices, so I don't find it a place where I spend more time than I have to publish photos maybe from the weekend or catch up on friends and family.
I
But it's
see you
not
there occasionally.
yeah, but it's not a hangout the way it used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see you more. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
Please.
and then there's some sites that are still in my ecosystem, which I'd like to spend more time on, but I just don't have enough hours in the day. I love TikTok. Find it really fun and just there's always something silly and amusing going on there. And yes, I know I'm probably 3 times as old as I should be to be using TikTok, but that's just me. I still find it a fun place to be.
We might see each other there someday because I'm hanging there occasionally, and I have a few videos there, but they don't, they're not going viral. Let's just say that.
Yeah, but I still just find it just, interesting to observe and see what's going on. And I wish I spent more time on Instagram. I always enjoy it when I do hang out there. It's not part of my daily routine, and it hasn't ever been. But I do have an account, and I enjoy it as much as I can. That's kind of my go-tos.
No, that's a good rundown, James. Thanks for sharing all that. The sun is coming in. I don't usually record late in the afternoon like this, and I didn't realize. I'm seeing it. It's clear that there's some kind of reflection going on that I couldn't fix unless I go and pull the shade, and I'm not going to stand up and pull the shade. So
There's almost a halo surrounding you, Bob.
yeah. Quite the contrary, I'm sure, James.
I'm almost
Don't give me
hearing
that much
a
credit.
chorus of angels singing.
That's funny. That is funny. Hey, so how about we did the past and current, I think, and throw the, the obligatory, what do you think about the future of question at you with regard to both teaching and in marketing and social media, or any way you want to go with this. But what do you foresee in terms of either, academia or marketing or healthcare, any of your interests? What do you see 1, 3, 5, 10 years from now happening?
Gosh, I spend so much time thinking about the future. I could go in many, many different directions. I've got strong opinions about healthcare. I could talk to you about the disruption of healthcare and what's going on there, because I follow parts of it very closely with a strong passion for what we call retail health, which is the Walmarts, the Amazons, the Dollar Generals of the world delivering healthcare, which sounds shocking. You wouldn't imagine that they could or would, but they've been in the pharmacy business for years.
Yes.
So it's really not that much of a stretch. And Walmart has gone so far as to build health clinics in Georgia. CVS obviously has minute clinics and different care delivery centers. Amazon is using telehealth as an interesting solution. So all of this is causing a lot of consternation in the world of primary care medicine because it's disruptive, right? Healthcare is notorious for not having a great consumer experience, and the notion of these very consumer experience-led organizations delivering care concerns many. So I've captured a lot of people's interest as I've thought about that and shared my thoughts. People can find that on my LinkedIn page if they're curious about where I think retail health is going and where primary health is going. In terms of teaching, my gosh, I think we're going to see more and more disruption in the world of higher ed. Again, it's very expensive. It's limited to people that can afford it, which is not the majority of the planet's population that wants to get a Northeastern education and can't get to Boston or can't afford the Northeastern experience. So I'd love to see technology being used to disrupt the higher ed experience and make it much more affordable, make it much more accessible, and allow people from every corner of the planet to join my class. During the pandemic, as you know, we were teaching remotely, and I had students over home in Russia or China or Brazil successfully participating in my class, and it opened my eyes to how the conventional students in a classroom experience could be completely disrupted. And it begged the question, why couldn't I have a class of 2,000 people?
You could, James, and
yeah.
And geez, if Northeastern could find a way to make that happen,
Wouldn't that change everything?
Yeah, it's transformative because they're getting the benefit. I joked, that I want to see Robert Rose and Joe Polizzi speak at your class. I mean, you probably could get 2,000 people to sign up for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm really excited about the possibilities for higher ed to reinvent itself and create all kinds of new opportunities for students, but also for faculty to extend the reach. Because it's fun teaching to 25 students in my classroom every week, but it'd be equally fun to teach to 2,500 and reach students that are desperately in need of a higher ed experience.
Totally agree. It's happening, and I hope and believe that people like you and me could be part of it. I think because we have the marketing background, the vision, the technology skills, the ABC, always be curious, the desire to keep raising the bar. And that's becoming our career. You and I were talking offline, we've both been in the trenches in marketing at agencies, me mostly, you maybe more on the corporate client side, but both similar tracks. And now we both find ourselves in education. Let's keep working it, James, and we could help be part of that positive disruption.
Absolutely. And then the last kind of outlook I could share with you would just be in the world of marketing, where I've got the sense that obviously there's going to be ongoing change, right? That goes without saying. It's trite and almost a cliche, but I think the fundamentals that you and I have discussed, I think those are actually timeless. Um, Understanding your consumer, looking for unmet needs, communicating benefits, building brands, a lot of that stuff never goes away. What I'm excited about is just the new tools that we're being empowered with, most of them digital, right? That allow us to reach consumers in new ways, communicate in ways that we couldn't imagine 10, 15 years ago. But I would just hope we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, and abandon the principles that have served us so well. I think the challenge for tomorrow's leaders is keep the best of yesterday, but overlay it with the tools of tomorrow. And that's something I teach to my students and something I look for with my colleagues every day at work, as a matter of fact.
I'm writing this down. Keep the best of yesterday overlaid with the tools of tomorrow. I think that is what you just said. That is fantastic, James. Says James Gardner. Keep the best of yesterday along with the overlay with the tools of tomorrow. And if we can do that in academia and marketing and social media, geez, in this world, and we'd all be, happier, and we'd preserve, what the good of what's going on right now, and what's not would get better.
You're absolutely right.
Brighter days would be ahead. And on that note, a positive note, I'm going to wind things down, wrap things up. If you don't mind, James, I'm going to ask you to tell people, and this has been an awesome conversation, ridiculously awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I said, I learned more about people. Geez, I've known you for 3 years or so, 4 years coming into your classroom, but I didn't know half of this. I didn't know about you, maybe 3/4 of it. Tell people so they can take you up maybe on being one of the 2,000 people to attend your class when it opens up to that many. I'm joking, but hey, it's possible. Tell people how to reach you, James, how they can contact you on social media or any other way.
So the two best ways would be on LinkedIn. You can find me by searching for James A. Gardner. Not hard to find. There's not too many of us. And if you mention in your note of introduction that you're a listener of Bob's podcast, I'd be happy to connect with you. I'm sure we'll know mutual people in common, and it'd be a great jumping off point for a professional relationship. I'd love to also connect with folks on Twitter. You can find me with the handle James A. Gardner, Gardner. And I'm somewhat prolific. I used to be more prolific, but you'll usually see me weighing in a couple times a day, and certainly eager to make professional connections there and follow people. Again, if you mention that you're a friend of Bob's.
Yeah, you're a wealth of knowledge, and you're genuine and authentic, and as human gets, James. And I owe you a heap of thanks for the opportunities you give me to speak to your students, because it's not like I just speak and it's done. I speak and you number one, thank me publicly, which is always appreciated, because it usually results in contacts. And whether it's because of you thanking me publicly on social media, or the relationships I form in the classroom, or those selfies I take that everybody wants to be in the selfie. I use my selfie stick and get about 20 of your students in a picture, and we all connect. And like you say, as the students progress, we follow their career, educational journeys, career journeys, and networking and friendships. And that's what it's all about.
Bob, I'm so glad that you find it a fulfilling experience. That means a lot. But truthfully, the thanks goes to you for sharing your time, sharing your insights, oftentimes joining us in our classroom, which is a huge ask on a busy schedule like I'm sure you have. So we appreciate it, and all my students always appreciate just the support you endlessly show us. So thank you from all my past and present students.
You got it. It's lifetime. I will be there for you, James. Okay? Lifetime promise. Listen, I'm going to wind things down. I'm going to thank whoever's been listening, whoever is watching. You noticed I turned off a few lights here because the sun's like beaming down on me from here and causing like this kaleidoscope of colors, as James said, something over my head, something in my face. But fantastic conversation, James. And I know anybody listening, anybody watching would agree 110%. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. The pleasure's been all mine.
So everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. This has been Bob Cargill's Marketing Show with James Gardner, episode 134. It will be today is Tuesday, July 27. We'll have this up either later in the week or early next week, but soon. So it'll be up in late July or the first thing in August. Bob Cargill's Marketing Show with James Gardner. Thank you, James. And for my listeners and viewers, I will see you. I will talk to you again soon. Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.